In the heart of bustling Chicago, Officer Brian Miller made what seemed like a routine traffic stop. But what he didn't know was that the driver of this expensive black SUV was not who he expected. She was an FBI agent, and his arrogance and threats were about to backfire in the most public, spectacular way. Within minutes, his confidence would crumble before a crowd of onlookers. But how did it come to this? Let's rewind and see how a simple stop led to an unforgettable showdown. Chicago's downtown streets were alive with the familiar sounds of the city, honking horns, distant sirens, and a hum of conversations. Amid the traffic, Officer Brian Miller, a seasoned cop with salt and pepper hair and a hardened stare, sat in his patrol car at a busy intersection. His sharp eyes scanned each car that passed by, constantly on the lookout for suspicious behavior. To Brian, this often meant targeting people who didn't fit his personal ideas about who belonged in the city, particularly black drivers in expensive cars. Then he saw her. A sleek black SUV rolled into view, moving just under the speed limit. The driver was a poised black woman with striking features, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit. She looked calm, entirely unbothered by the rush of the city around her. But to Brian, her calm demeanor and high-end vehicle were all he needed to sound the alarm. Without any valid reason, he muttered to himself, "Let's see what she's hiding," and switched on his siren. The woman, Jessica Reed, noticed the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. She'd been in this position before. As an FBI agent who specialized in investigating law enforcement misconduct, she was no stranger to being stopped for no reason. Her heart rate stayed steady as she signaled and smoothly pulled over to the curb. She adjusted her blazer and took a deep breath, mentally preparing for yet another baseless stop. Officer Miller got out of his car and strode over, his hand casually resting on his holstered gun, his boots thudding against the asphalt. His approach was authoritative, almost confrontational, as he leaned into her open window, casting a shadow from the brim of his hat. "License and registration," he barked, skipping any friendly formalities. Jessica turned and looked at him directly, her face calm but her eyes unwavering. "Good afternoon, officer," she replied politely. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" The politeness did little to soften Brian's rough attitude. His scowl deepened. "You were driving suspiciously," he snapped. "Now hand over your paperwork." Jessica raised an eyebrow but complied, reaching into her glove compartment and retrieving her documents slowly, ensuring her FBI badge was visible beside them. She handed over the papers, her eyes steady on Brian's face as he noticed the badge. A flicker of recognition flashed across his face, but he ignored it, snatching the paperwork and walking back to his cruiser without a word. Jessica watched through her side mirror as Brian hunched over his computer, furiously typing in her information. He was clearly not finding anything incriminating, but his body language showed frustration. He glanced back at her, his jaw set in anger while she sat there calmly, waiting. Soon, another police car pulled up. A young officer, visibly nervous, stepped out and approached Brian, glancing at Jessica's car. Through her open window, she overheard their conversation. Brian," the rookie whispered uneasily. "You sure about this? She's FBI." Brian waved him off dismissively, his scorn obvious. "Badge could be fake," he scoffed. "Probably some wannabe hotshot. Let's dig a little deeper." Jessica's patience was running thin. This wasn't the first time she had been subjected to unnecessary harassment, but she'd had enough. Calmly, she reached for her phone and dialed a number from memory. As the call connected, she spoke clearly, her voice a mix of authority and resolve. "This is Special Agent Reed. I need immediate support. I'm dealing with an escalating situation with local law enforcement." She recited her location, glancing back in the mirror to see Brian and the younger officer staring in surprise. As Brian approached her car again, the confidence in his stride was faltering. Jessica placed her phone on speaker, the call still active. She met his gaze with a cool, unwavering stare. "Is there a problem, Officer Miller?" she asked. Brian's voice was loud and forceful. "Step out of the car," he ordered, tapping on the window again. Now, Jessica didn't budge. She tilted her head slightly and looked him up and down. "On what grounds, officer?" she replied, her voice steady and calm. "I said, step out of the car," he repeated, leaning closer, his frustration evident. With a slow, steady breath, Jessica unbuckled her seatbelt, opened her door, and stepped out, adjusting her blazer as though she were heading into a high-stakes negotiation. "I'm recording this encounter," she said, gesturing to her badge. "And to clarify, I'm Special Agent Jessica Reed, FBI Internal Affairs." Ryan's smirk flickered, but he forced a sneer. "Oh really? Hands on the hood," he demanded. The rookie officer took a hesitant step forward, looking at Jessica, and then back at Brian. "Brian, her badge checks out," he murmured, glancing nervously between them. "Shut it, rookie," Brian barked. "I'll handle this." But before Brian could say another word, Jessica's phone buzzed. She picked it up and answered, pressing the speaker button without hesitation. "Agent Reed," came a commanding voice on the other end. "We've received your alert. State Police and FBI backup are on the way, ETA 5 minutes. Ryan's face drained of color as he stumbled back, realizing the gravity of the situation. What is this?" he stammered, his confidence crumbling. Jessica took a step forward, her gaze as cold as steel. "This," she replied calmly, "is the end of your career, Officer Miller." The tension was electric as unmarked cars and a state police cruiser quickly converged on the scene. The crowd that had gathered began to murmur, phones out, capturing every moment. Two sharp-suited FBI agents emerged from their cars and walked directly toward Jessica. "Agent Reed," one said with concern, "are you all right?" Jessica nodded, her composure unshaken. "I'm fine, but we need to discuss this officer's conduct," she said, tilting her head toward Brian, who now looked visibly shaken. Before he could say anything in his defense, a state police officer stepped forward. "Officer Miller, you're under investigation for misconduct. Hand over your badge and weapon." Ryan's face turned red as he instinctively reached for his gun, only to be stopped by the icy glare of the state officer. Defeated, he slowly removed his badge and gun, his hands trembling, and handed them over. "This is all a misunderstanding," he protested, his voice desperate. "She's blowing this way out of proportion." Jessica turned to the crowd, her calm voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't the first time he's done this," she said, her words directed to both the public and the law enforcement officials. "Run his stop records, and you'll see a pattern of targeting minorities." The rookie officer behind Brian, who had been visibly tense throughout the exchange, suddenly stepped forward. His voice was shaky but resolute. He makes us target minorities all the time," he blurted out, his face pale but determined. "I've had enough of it." Brian whipped his head around, his face twisted in anger. "You're throwing me under the bus." The younger officer straightened, his gaze meeting Brian's without fear. "No, Miller," he replied firmly. "You drove yourself here." The crowd erupted, their voices mingling in a wave of murmurs and shouts as Brian's defiance turned into sheer desperation. Jessica watched the scene unfold, a calm satisfaction evident on her face. She had not only exposed one officer's corruption, but had struck a blow at a system that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Days later, the incident dominated national headlines. Body cam footage and bystander videos revealed Brian's long-standing abuse of power. An internal investigation uncovered years of misconduct, racial profiling, and wrongful charges. Brian was fired, and charges for abuse of authority were brought against him. Jessica received public commendation for her bravery. At a press conference, she spoke directly about the larger issue at hand. "This isn't about one bad cop," she said. "It's about dismantling the culture that enables people like him to thrive unchecked." The young officer who spoke out was transferred to a different precinct, where he focused on rebuilding trust with the community. Jessica continued her work at the FBI, now heading a task force to tackle corruption in law enforcement. The encounter didn't just end Brian Miller's career. It sparked a conversation about justice, reform, and accountability that could no longer be ignored. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe to Unfolded Tales Explained and press the bell icon so you never miss an update.